Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me in this 12th session where we are going to explore the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. आज के इस सेशन में हम 14वां अध्याय गीता का एक्सप्लोर करने जा रहे हैं. बट बिफोर आई डू दैट, आप में से कईयों ने मुझे ईमेल पे, व्हाट्सएप पे एक रिक्वेस्ट भेजी थी कि मैं कॉन्शियसनेस को और थोड़ी बेहतर तरीके से एक्सप्लोर करूं या आपके साथ उसके बारे में शेयर करूं. आई डिस्कस कॉन्शियसनेस अ बिट मोर एट डेप्थ because a few of you have mentioned that you couldn't necessarily grasp what consciousness means and how it impacts our experience of life and world around us, the universe around us, while we discussed that in the previous session. So इसीलिए मैंने खास करके आज के इस सेशन में एक बहुत ही अलग सा तरीका सोचा है to discuss consciousness कि rather than theoretically explain what it means as per Bhagavad Gita as well as per our Vedic scriptures, I thought maybe I'll take you through an experiential process of discovering the consciousness. So this is जैसे हम कहते हैं Vedic scriptures, our Vedic knowledge was not based on dissective science. Dissective science जो होता है, जो आजकल का modern science है, which dissects the information and things to figure out the depths and the machinations of it. कि कोई भी एक चीज़ है, अगर कोई matter है तो then the science dissects it and figures out कि okay, it's made up of molecules. Then it dissects the molecules further to tell okay, it is made up of these atoms. Then it dissects the atoms further and says okay, these are the forces at work, and then further the atom is made up of electrons, protons, neutrons and whatnot, and then further it goes into quarks and the process will continue. So it's a process of dissection, whether it is biology, chemistry, physics, you name it. All the aspects of modern science are about dissection. There is also an element of deduction, deductive science, कि जिसे हम logical interpretation कह सकते हैं, कि जहाँ पे we discuss a concept and then deduct based on logical exploration further insights from it, right? But our Vedic knowledge is based on experiential exploration, which means that it's all based on life experience. It's not dissection, it is not deduction, it is experience, right? So आज का भी जो एक experiment है to in order to experience the consciousness, it is also kind of based on the similar process that our Vedic sages had in order to experience the richness and the core of life. Right, so all set for that. Of course, I'm going to ask whether you're able to see the screen and hear me well, because through the session I'll be asking very specific questions. और अगर आप truly इसमें से insight लेना चाहते हैं, then my request to you would be that try and answer these questions to yourself while I ask them. Take time. I'll give enough pauses. मैं काफ़ी जगह पे pauses दूंगा ताकि you get your own time to answer these questions. And then as we proceed, you will yourself start realizing and becoming aware of the very process of what consciousness is and how it impacts our view of life and the universe around us. Okay, all set? Great. So in our journey of experiential inference, let me ask you my first question. My request to you is कि look at either left or right of wherever you are. आप अगर मेरा ये वीडियो देख रहे हैं मोबाइल पे, लैपटॉप पे, टैबलेट पे, जहाँ पे भी आप हैं, अभी बैठे हैं, खड़े हैं, सोए हैं, wherever you are, आप बस या तो लेफ्ट में देखें या तो राइट में देखें. And then of course you would be seeing lot of different things on the left or the right, whichever direction that you have chosen. And all that I'm asking is कि pick just one object. आपको left या right direction में आप अगर देख रहे हैं तो आपको जो भी कुछ दिख रहा है, you might be seeing lot of objects around you. तो उसमें से just pick one object and then kind of decide what is it that you are seeing right now. I'll give you probably 3-4 seconds before I continue. So pick one object of all the things that you're seeing. Alright, so you must have seen probably a wall, a painting on the wall, a chair, probably a window. Through the window you may have seen a tree, probably sunlight falling on the tree. You might have seen a river, you might have seen birds flocking, you might have seen dogs running around, whatever, right? Each of you would have had a specific object that you would have chosen from all the things that you would have seen. बहुत सारी चीज़ें होंगी आपके लेफ्ट या राइट में, बुक्स होंगे, फर्नीचर होगा, सामान होगा, but you would have chosen one thing. तो आप सब की जो प्रोसेस है to pick one amidst all the objects that you would see would be different. Right from the point of time when I asked you to choose between left or right, आप में से कईयों ने लेफ्ट चूज़ किया होगा, किसी ने राइट चूज़ किया होगा. Some may have just randomly chosen left or right. Somebody might have had a logical reason behind it कि left में तो there is blank wall, so maybe I'll look at right. Somebody would prefer the right rather than the left. Whatever, हर एक का एक process of picking up left versus right, and now that you have chosen one direction or the other, picking up one object over the other would be very different. But then the core of what I'm getting into is that the very process कि जब आप यहाँ पे बैठे, आप ये मेरे सेशन को सुनने लगे, देखने लगे, at that very point of time as well, your eyes would have captured lot of information around you. Your eyes would have glanced on the left and the right. They would have seen the objects that you saw. But it was only when I asked you to look into the left or the right, it was only जब मैंने आपको पूछा कि लेफ्ट में देखो, राइट में देखो, and further still when I asked you कि अब जो भी कुछ दिख रहा है उसमें से एक ऑब्जेक्ट को पिक करो, at that point of time that very object came into the foreground. राइट जब आप पहले ये पूरा सेशन सुनने के लिए बैठे थे, when you were on the screen watching this session, at that time as well your eyes would have glanced on that object, whatever that was, the book, the furniture, the birds, the window, whatever that you would have finalized as an object of preference, वो आपके eyes ने पहले भी कैप्चर किया होगा. But it was only when I asked you the question कि look into the left and the right and further pick one object over the other, that very object became prominent. Right, this is the way our mind processes information. So what is at work at the core? At the core, of course, there is consciousness. How do I define consciousness? How do we define consciousness? Consciousness is that faculty that helps all of us become aware of everything that's around us. Right, so what am I defining consciousness as? Consciousness is that which makes you aware. Right, it's that which makes you aware. So it is qualityless, isn't it? That it is not making you aware of this over something else. It is making you aware of everything. But then you finally chose one object over the other. How does that happen? So there must be some additional faculty that helps you not only be aware but also pay attention, focus. So there must be some faculty in your brain beyond the faculty of becoming aware and being conscious. There must be some additional faculty that helps you focus, that helps you get attention, right? Because when I asked you to look into left and the right, you chose left over the right or right over the left. When I asked you to pick one object over the other, you picked up one object, and now you are focusing on that particular object, so all your attention is on that object, and you're able to see that object in much more detail than any other object that is around it, right? Because you are now focusing. So there is a faculty of focus and attention. So here in the screen, on the slide, all I'm saying is, if let's give it an exemplification, right? So the bulb on the extreme right that you see on the screen, that bulb is kind of an exemplification of consciousness, right? Imagine that consciousness is something that is throwing arrows of awareness pretty much 360 degree, across the directions. But then it's that faculty of attention, the torch, that kind of helps the faculty of awareness concentrate or focus on one thing over the others, isn't it? There must be some additional faculty to help you capture the visual information, right? So which is of course your eyes. It is because of your eyes कि आप visual information को capture कर रहे हैं. And what is it it's capturing? It's capturing the light that's reflecting from the objects, right? So अब object को पिकअप कर रहे हैं तुम्हारे आइज, उस आइज से आने वाली इंफॉर्मेशन जो है, लाइट रिफ्लेक्टेड फ्रॉम ऑब्जेक्ट्स बीइंग कैप्चर्ड बाय द आइज, इज देन थ्रोन इनटू सम फैकल्टी ऑफ योर ब्रेन which is figuring it out what it is, that okay, it seems to be an object which is XYZ in color, red, yellow, blue, whatever, it is of this particular shape, it is of this particular size and dimension, at so much of distance from you, whatnot, right? So there is a lot of information that your eyes are capturing and giving it into your brain, and the brain is figuring it out what it is. Then further there is a faculty of intellect, processing, कि जहाँ पे इस पूरी चीज़ को प्रोसेस करके the brain is telling you that it is your object. It is actually a telephone, it is actually a book, it is actually a car, it is actually a window, it is actually a bird, or whatever, right? Because there is something in your brain, your memory, your processing, that tells you that, okay, hey, this is actually a book, or this is actually a telephone, this is actually a mobile that you are seeing, right? So ये पूरा जो process है, ये process का core है the consciousness, which is a faculty that helps you be aware. उसके ऊपर एक रैपर है ऑफ अटेंशन, उसके ऊपर एक रैपर है ऑफ इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रोसेसिंग, राइट? उसके ऊपर एक रैपर है ऑफ सेंसरी ऑर्गन दैट हेल्प्स यू कैप्चर द फिजिकल इंफॉर्मेशन. इन दिस केस इट इज़ द साइट और विजुअल इंफॉर्मेशन. एंड देन एट द आउटसाइड देयर इज द object, which you are perceiving or which you are becoming aware of. So all that you are seeing or observing at this point is there is a slight difference between awareness and attention, and now you see a chain of events that happen. The moment I tell you, hey, look into either left or right, and the moment I tell you pick one object over the other, there is a sense of faculty. There is a faculty which helps you become aware of what's around you. Then there is a faculty of attention and focus. Then there is the faculty of intellect, which processes the information, tells you what that object is. Then there is a further faculty of picking up sensory information. In this case it is eyes. And then at the farthest end it is the object. This is the chain of event that happens when you look at something, isn't it? And at the core of all of it is the faculty of consciousness, which is untainted. Untainted kyun? Because this consciousness has no quality. It is not about focus or attention or picking one object to the other. It is just plain simple ability that you have to become aware of all that's around you, right? It is just that there are wrappers on top of this faculty that lets you be focused, be attentive, and then pick specific information, rather than anything else, right? Now let's move forward. So clearly there is a specific difference between awareness and attention. Now if I ask you to close your eyes for a minute and tell me what the shape, tell yourself, or remember the shape and the color of the object that you chose as part of my earlier question. I'll give you 2 seconds. Can you when you're closing your eyes, can you imagine the object that you just saw maybe a few minutes back, a few seconds back? Can you imagine the size, the shape of the object, the color of the object, the place in your house or in the room that you are, where it is, how it is placed, what's all around it, right? You can imagine it, right? You can see it as if you just saw earlier, right? The image is very much clear. Of course it will differ from individual to individual. For some it might be absolutely clear. It's as if you are seeing a movie and you're seeing an image, you're seeing a painting, and you can see it as if it is live. For some you might be seeing it not as clearly, but you might definitely remember the color and shape. It depends on your individual कैपेबिलिटी, कंस्टिट्यूशन, कंडीशनिंग एंड वॉट नॉट. बिकॉज हम सब में, जैसे हमने पहले बात की थी, कि अपने अपने स्ट्रेंथ्स एंड वीकनेसेस हैं. किसी का विजुअल फैकल्टी कुछ ज़्यादा स्ट्रांग है, किसी का कम है, किसी का ऑडियो फैकल्टी कुछ स्ट्रांग एंड कम है, किसी का सेंसरी या स्मेलिंग कैपेबिलिटी कम या ज़्यादा है. सो हम में से हर एक का ये कैपेबिलिटीज डिफर होगा. How many of us have actually trained our mind to remember visual information and how many of us have not? This will be very different. But then all of us, I'm sure, would be able to at least remember, what you just saw a few seconds back, a few minutes back, right? So now there is an additional faculty in our brain of memory, right? The moment I asked you, can you remember what you just saw? आपने क्या किया? आपके brain में there is a specific component or an area where your memories are stored, and you just looked into that memory, asked that particular section, hey, what is it that I just saw, can you retrieve? Then you got the information retrieved, and now it is in front of that very specific part of your brain which actually told what your eyes have seen, right? Because in your mind you can see the image, your eyes are closed, so it's not that your eyes are seeing it, it's something in your mind that's reading it, that's seeing it, right? So the actual aspect of seeing, actual जो देखना है वो आपके दिमाग में हो रहा है. It is happening in your brain. It's not happening in your eyes. Eyes are just capturing the information. The seeing is actually happening in your mind, in your brain, right? And that faculty is also the same faculty which your memory is triggering. आपके memory में जहाँ पे भी information stored है, वो memory retrieve करके उसी जगह पे दे रही है, उसी सेक्शन में दे रही है जहाँ पे द सीइंग इज हैपनिंग, राइट, एंड दैट इज व्हेन यू आर एबल टू सी द इमेज लाइव एंड क्लियर, इजंट इट? सो ये पूरा एक प्रोसेस है ऑफ हाउ एन ऑब्जेक्ट इज परसीव्ड, एंड एट द कोर ऑफ ऑल ऑफ इट इज दिस बल्ब, दैट यू सी, विच इज लाइक exemplification of the consciousness which is making you aware of all that you're seeing around you. Now we can repeat the same exercise with some other sensory input. In this case, let me ask you a question. Can you focus on the background noise and tell me one of the distinct sounds you can overhear? I'll give you probably another 4-5 seconds. I'll stay silent. Just calmly and quietly hear what is in the background. While I'm not speaking, of course I'll go silent in a second now, but the moment I'm silent for a few seconds, just try and listen to what's happening around you. You might be hearing multiple sounds. Pick one sound that you want to prioritize over the others, and then tell to yourself, hey, I have picked up this particular sound. Okay? So I'll count to 5, and then we can discuss further. Start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So what is it that you could hear in the background? A few of you would have heard birds chirping. A few of you would have heard the sound of the rain. Few of you would have heard sound of the traffic on the road. Few of you might have heard the sound of the fan. For example, for me, I just heard the sound of the tanker that came in our society to fill in the water tank, and the sound of its engine running in right now. So what's happening here? आपके ईयर्स ने, आपके कान ने ये जो साउंड है, और एंड दिस वाज जस्ट वन साउंड ऑफ ऑल, देयर वुड हैव बीन कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ ऑल दीज साउंड्स, right, in the background, but the moment I asked you to focus on one sound, that's when all these sounds came at the forefront. Then you picked up one sound or the other, और again आपका logic हर एक का अलग अलग होगा. किसी ने, somebody must have picked up a sound that is the most prominent one amidst all the sounds that one is hearing. Some of you might have picked up a sound that is most pleasing to you. Some of you might have picked up a sound that is the most cantankerous, or most troubling, discomforting, right? हर एक के reasons अलग अलग हैं, but then the process is the same. What is the process? The process is there is some faculty, consciousness, which is helping you be aware of what's happening around you. Then there is a faculty of attention. The moment I said, hey, focus on the sound, right? Now you're closing your eyes and trying to give your ears all the attention that, hey, pick up, the ears were already picking up all the information. ऐसे नहीं था कि ears ने अभी आपके बोलने के बाद या आपके फोकस के बाद में सुनना चालू किया. The ears were already getting all the information in, and the mind was also processing it, but the attention was gone, right? The moment the attention is gone, what's the use? So think of it this way. If you are in a dark room, आप अंधेरे कमरे में हैं, और अंधेरे कमरे में आजू बाजू में बहुत सारे ऑब्जेक्ट्स हैं. Now until you shine a torchlight on an object, you will not be able to see it, right? It doesn't mean that the objects are not there. So think of your brain in that context, that it's a dark room, and the objects are all the information that your sensory inputs are giving you, right? The brain is already getting all this information. The sensory inputs, the sensory organs, eyes, ears, nose, they are all getting this information 24/7. वो कभी बंद नहीं हो रहा है, right? Even if you close your eyes, for example, आपने अगर eyelids भी बंद कर दिया आपने, you would still see the dark and light, राइट? अगर आपके आंखों के सामने आपने हाथ डाल दिया तो आपको एकदम ब्लैक सा दिखेगा, हाथ खोल दिया तो आपको you will see something much more fainter and light, even if you have closed the eyes, because the faculty of visual sensory organ is still on. It is active, it is 24/7 active, right? But just because the torch has not moved into one object over the other, आपके foreground में वो नहीं आ रहा है, right? The moment you shine the torch on one object, that's when the perception happens, right? So sensory organs getting the information in is an activity that's happening 24/7. It's constantly on, right? But then there is some sense of attention, focus, that actually helps you know what that particular object is, right? So there is a faculty of attention, but at the core is the consciousness which is helping you be aware, right? So these are three distinct things: consciousness, which is helping you be aware; object and the sensory organs, which capture the object and get that information in, and then a faculty in your brain which interprets that signal, the visual signal, the smell, the signal of the smell, the signal of touch, and all that, that processes it and tells you what it is, and then an intellectual faculty which tells you what that object is. But beyond all of it, there is this faculty of attention, the torch shining on a particular object, which actually brings things to the foreground, right? And वो foreground के आने के बाद में then you try and get that detail further, right? जैसे इस केस में आपके कानों ने बहुत सारे आवाज़ continually सुना जा रहा था, right? But it was only when I asked you pick one sound or the other, that's when the torch kind of shined on those sounds, and then you picked one sound or the other, and then you told yourself, hey, maybe I'm choosing this sound or the other sounds, right? So the process now is awareness, attention, memory, torch, that is attention. You've got that now, right? Now let me ask you to repeat the same question or repeat the same thing, that now close your eyes and try and remember the sound that you just heard a few minutes back. It's going to be very difficult, right? I mean, if I tell you even now कि close your eyes and remember the object that you saw a few minutes back, आप में से कई लोग वो फट से बोल देंगे, hey, I saw a book, I saw a chair, I saw a mouse, I saw a laptop, I saw a phone or whatnot, right? But the moment I tell you, hey, close your eyes and try and remember the sound that you heard, it's going to be a bit more difficult. If I tell you, hey, try and remember the smell of the food that you had at the time of the breakfast, it's going to be a bit difficult for you to have that. Why? Because there is a sense of intensity impacting the memory, right? So the more intense the imprint of the senses, the better the memory. It's literally as simple as जितने intensity का light वो torch में होगा, उतने intensity से आपको वो clearly दिखेगा, right? If the batteries of the torch are already low, then the light being thrown off from the torch will be low, and therefore you might see only a faint faint description of the object. But the moment you have the new batteries in, the torch is shining bright, आपको पूरा object clearly दिखेगा, right? So it's the intensity of the light that helps you capture most information on the object, and of course then retain it, isn't it? So visual interpretation is far more intense than any other signal, and that's why visual memory is stronger than any other memory, right? But it's again different from different for different people. There are some people who have the best of faculties of smell, and that's why they can remember fragrances. They can tell one fragrance or the other from a distance. For example, my mom, when she's in a room, she might be in a bedroom, many feet away, but she can quickly smell and say, there's something burning on the stove, which I probably am sitting right there and I couldn't smell it, isn't it? So the faculties differ from different people, but the fact that it's the intensity of the imprint that the sensory input brings in, that makes the memory work, right? The more the intensity, more the better the memory. This is also again experiential, right? It's very commonsensical, it's experiential, it's within our experience. We all can just think about it and immediately know because it's true. Why? Because we have experienced it. ये हम सबका experience है, isn't it? So now what all we have understood? We have understood the faculty of consciousness, that hey, it's something that makes us aware. But then beyond that faculty of consciousness, there is a wrapper of attention and focus. The higher the focus, the higher the memory. And then of course there is a faculty of sensory organs that captures the information about the object, a faculty of interpretation that captures that information and tells you that hey, it's a visual memory, it's a visual input, it's an audio input, or it's a input of the smell and whatnot. And then there is a intellectual capability that tells you what that object is based on whatever you have already known or learned. अब इसमें भी think of हर एक जो segments हैं, इनको आप ठीक से समझें. जो intellectual faculty है वो भी हम सब में कैसे differ करेगा based on how you have been trained. For example, if I were to walk into a forest, right, because I'm not somebody who's well versed with the forest environment, who I've not been trained to live in the forest, so I'll probably not see as many things as probably a colleague of mine who's well trained in being in forest and living in forest, and he might actually see certain things on the trees, like a claw mark of a tiger, probably the pug marks on the ground, the monkeys kind of chirp, kind of shouting and running away from tree to trees, birds flying away, lot of things, and then the colleague might say, hey, there's a tiger nearby. Whereas for me, I would not even have noticed all of those things. I might have seen those. I might have seen the same things that my colleague would have seen, but my processing would not be as good as him or her because I have not been in the forest, isn't it? So हमारा जो knowledge है, जो भी हमारा understanding है, knowledge है, memory है, उसके base पे हमारा ये processing better या worse होगा, isn't it? And there's a dependency of our knowledge and training on how we interpret and process the information about the object, isn't it? Our emotional attachment to the object will be different. That's why when somebody chose a book over a phone, the decision probably came in from an attachment to reading, right? That he prefers books over the phone. One never knows, but there is a subjectivity of experience, of expertise, of knowledge, of training, of conditioning that impacts the processing of information. So what all we have learned so far? We have learned that there is a faculty of consciousness, faculty of plain awareness, there is a faculty of attention, there's a thing of higher the intensity of the imprint, higher the memory, there's a faculty of memory, there's a faculty of processing sensory information, and then there is a subjectivity of conditioning involved to tell you what that object is, right? These are the things that, again, you don't need anybody else to tell you all of this, right? Because it's your experience, it's your experience, it's my experience, isn't it? And at this stage, let me give you a quick intro into what truly the meditation is all about. राइट हम में से बहुत लोग ये सुन चुके हैं या पढ़ चुके हैं कि मेडिटेशन इज़ बेसिकली ट्रेनिंग योर माइंड टू हैव नो थॉट्स इन योर माइंड, राइट? दैट यू शुड बी ज़ीरो, योर माइंड शुड हैव नथिंग at any point of time, right? It's impossible. अगर कोई आपको इस तरह से कह रहा है कि meditation is about having no thoughts in your mind, then he or she himself probably or herself doesn't know what meditation means, right? As long as you're alive, जब तक आप जिंदा है, आपका ब्रेन एक्टिव है, आप ब्रेन डेड नहीं है, तब तक आपके दिमाग में कुछ ना कुछ तो आएगा ही आएगा. योर ब्रेन विल बी एक्टिव. इट कांट बी दैट योर ब्रेन इज नॉट एक्टिव, एंड इट कांट बी दैट यू वॉन्ट हैव थॉट्स, right? There would be some or other thought, and meditation is therefore not about taking thoughts away from your mind. It's impossible as long as you're alive, right? So what is then the process of meditation? See, on the left what you see is how all of us live on a daily basis. What does it show? It shows that the torch is probably moving like fan on all the directions, and all that it means is हमारे daily life में, based on the context, based on the situation, based on the premise, multiple objects come into the foreground time and again, right? अभी आप मेरा सेशन को सुन रहे हैं, सेशन को सुनते सुनते शायद आप कुछ आपके कानों में आवाज़ आएगी और आपको सडनली कुछ अलग याद आ जाएगा. You probably would want to do something else, and something else will come into the foreground, and this cycle repeats continually, isn't it? जब तक आप awake हैं, जब तक आप जागृत है, तब तक your mind is constantly churning, processing of one object over the other, processing of one sensory input over the other. It's prioritizing one thing over the other in terms of processing a sensory information and working it out for you. And that just like the blades of the fan, this whole thing is moving, it's rotating constantly. आपका माइंड एक कांस्टेंट फ्लक्स में है, राइट? इट्स कॉन्स्टेंटली फोकसिंग एंड डिफोकसिंग फ्रॉम वन ऑब्जेक्ट टू द अदर, right? Meditation, truly, by the very word of it, it means focusing all your energies, all your mental faculties on one object at the exclusion of everything else. That's it. That is exactly what meditation means. Meditation just simply means while your mind is in default mode, constantly focused on one object or the other, getting focused, then defocused, and then again getting focused on something else. This process needs to stop for whatever, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, आधा घंटा हो, 5 मिनट हो, 15 मिनट हो, 1 घंटा हो, whatever time that you meditate, all that you're doing is trying to focus all that energy, that mental energy, into one thing. because that actually helps your brain rest for a while, isn't it? आप सोचो, आप अगर 4 घंटा चल रहे हो, 1 घंटा दौड़ रहे हो, 15 मिनट एक्सरसाइज कर रहे हो, उसके बाद में आप 5 मिनट भी बैठते हो, आपको अच्छा लगता है. Why? Because you're finally giving your body rest, isn't it? If you are eating food, probably after eating food you're again giving your stomach some rest for 4 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, until you're hungry again and you eat again, right? So all through your day, you're giving your body enough rest, and all your different organs rest. The cycle repeats, but आपके brain को rest कब मिलता है? When you sleep. Fine, but then that means till the time that you're asleep, and again we'll discuss what happens when you're asleep as well. It doesn't mean that your brain necessarily gets the rest, but of course definitely gets rest as compared to what your brain is, the level of activity in the brain is when you're awake, right? But you're awake for what, almost 16 hours in a day, 16-18 hours in a day. For those 16-18 hours, the brain is constantly moving from one thing to the other, and that's why the moment you let your brain be focused on one thing, and that one thing could be anything, that one thing could be the image of the idol that you worship, it could be reading Quran, it could be reading Bible, it could be focusing on a deity, the idol of the deity that you worship. It could be a photo of a guru, or again a deity that you worship, or whatever, right? It's just that focusing on one thing or the other, right? And that's also in a way being in a zone, because what happens when you actually watch a movie, when you're actually watching a movie for 3 hours that you like, right? It's a movie that you're enjoying, that you're engrossed in. At the end of those 3 hours, you feel refreshed, you feel light, you feel at peace. Why? Because for those 3 hours, your brain got enough rest, that it was focused only on one thing or everything else, isn't it? The moment you hear a lovely song, probably you're in a drive, you're talking to your closest of people, you're sharing, having a heart to heart. For those 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, आपको लगता है कि यार मज़ा आ गया, you feel at peace, you feel rested, you feel rejuvenated. All that happens because your brain was focused on one thing at the exclusion of others, right? Now this, for you to feel that, you need external trigger, you need a movie, you need your friends, you need lovely conversation, you need the right music, book, or whatnot, right? What if you don't have anything else? What if you don't want any dependencies on these things, and you want to be able to enjoy these rest periods, or in zone periods on your own, without any dependency on any external factor? Then that is where the meditation comes in, right? Because all that then you have to do is focus on one photo, imagery, idol, mantra, or whatnot, right? And if you have nothing else, at best you can just close your eyes and then focus on the breath, going in and coming, getting in and going out, and that's more than enough, right? Because that gets your mind the necessary rest, and that's meditation, right? But that's still stage 1. The final stage is when actually your mind is mindful. What do I mean by mindful? From a chaos where your mind is constantly moving from one focus to the other, to a state when now the mind is focused on everything. It doesn't have to focus and defocus and again focus. It is pretty much focused on everything else. Why? Because now you are at that stage where your consciousness doesn't need a necessary attention faculty to get your attention to one object or the other. You are actually so much mindful that you are aware of everything that's all around you. Why? Because see, ultimately all your senses are giving you the information anyways. आपकी आँखें, आपके कान, आपका nose, this is all active. The information is already coming in. It's just that it's the faculty of focus and attention that is kind of rotating between one to the other, and that is why your mind is in chaos. What if you have trained your mind so much that now at any point of time you say focus, the attention faculty immediately stops and get you the focus that you need. And once you have trained your mind so much more, that now you can say, I don't need this attention focus faculty at all. I'll just remove it, and now I'll have focus on everything else. जस्ट थिंक ऑफ इट दिस वे कि एक बल्ब के ऊपर अगर मैंने कवर डाला है और कवर के ऊपर एक छोटा सा होल रखा है, अब वो होल के थ्रू ही लाइट जा रही है, देन दैट होल बिकम्स द फोकस फैकल्टी, राइट? बिकॉज नाउ द मोमेंट आई मूव अराउंड द होल अराउंड द बल्ब, द लाइट शाइन्स एंड मूव्स अराउंड जस्ट लाइक द टॉर्च, राइट? द मोमेंट आई रिमूव दैट कवर, now the entire bulb is open and now it is shining bright and across the room, right? The entire room is alight, right? The same way the brain is alight now, because the consciousness, the level of consciousness has been raised so that there is no need for you to have a focus faculty, attention faculty, and now you can focus on everything with as much intensity at the same time. हर चीज़ आप उसी इंटेंसिटी से देख रहे हो विदाउट हैविंग टू प्रायोरिटाइज कंपेयर और defocus and focus and all, and that's actually being mindful. So the whole process of meditation actually is moving from a chaotic mind to a focused mind to a mindful mind, right? So that's just a quick note on meditation. There's of course much more depth to all that I just said, but this is just so that you understand where this consciousness comes in and how does it impact, isn't it? This is all when we are awake. This is all the story when we are awake. Now what happens when we sleep, right? Because see, this is a story of three avasthas, three states of mind. In our Vedic scriptures, there are three avasthas. Even in the Ganesh Atharvashisha that I referred earlier, आपने सुना होगा कि मैंने गणेश अथर्वशीर्षा का एक लिंक दिया था, where I've explained and translated Ganesh Atharvashisha for you. उसमें भी एक word है अवस्था त्रयातीतः, which means that O Ganesha, you are beyond the three avasthas that we have. ये तीन अवस्था क्या है? This is being awake or जागृत अवस्था, sleeping and dreaming, which is the swapna avastha, and then deep sleep or shushupti avastha. So there are only three states of the mind: जागृत or being awake, swapna, which is dreaming, or REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and the third is deep sleeping, where you are fast asleep, and that's called sushupti avastha, right? So now all that we discussed so far is while our mind is alert and awake, right? It's the jagrut avastha. But now let's see what happens when we are asleep. First of all, how many senses do you think are active when we are asleep? That's right, all the senses are active. None of the senses are shut off, right? All the senses are active. आपकी आँखें भी active है. It's just that you have closed your eyelids. But that's why even if you're asleep, especially when you're dreaming, and if somebody shines a torch on you, you probably don't wake up immediately. But in your dream, that light probably reflects in some way. You might suddenly see a spaceship and shining a bright light on you while it lands. You might see sun coming in. You might see somebody shining a torch on you in the sleep or whatnot. But your dreams, there would be something reflecting in the dream to kind of align to the input that your eyes are getting now, which is a torch shining on your eyelids. Some sense of light shining bright on you, right? So that means that your sensory organs have picked up that signal. आपके sensory input ने वो signal pick up किया है कि yes, there is something shining on me right now, isn't it? So all your senses are active. None of the senses have lost their activeness. They're very much active. But then there is still a lot of difference between being awake and being asleep, especially within the sleeping part, being in a REM sleep or while you're dreaming, and when you're fast asleep, when there is no dream, you're fast asleep, right? So let's get to that as well. So first let's think about while you're dreaming, what happens. Can you remember a recent dream that you dreamt, and can you count the distinct objects that you saw in the dream? And then further, can you describe the shape and color of any two of the three objects? See, firstly, मेरे ख्याल से हम में से बहुत सारे कम लोग होंगे जिनको ड्रीम याद भी होंगे, right? Because I'm sure all of us do dream, but very few of us actually remember those dreams. हम शायद रोज़ सपने देखते हैं, लेकिन हम में से बहुत सारे लोगों को, कुछ ही लोगों को वो सपने याद रहते हैं और कम बार याद रहते हैं. It's not that every day we remember the dream, right? That we dream. It's probably once in a while. Right, so again there is this sense of intensity of imprint, right? The more intense the dream, whether positive or negative, but the more intense the dream, the higher the chances that you'll remember it. The more the fact that you were suddenly brought out of your sleep while you were dreaming, the chances of you retaining the memory of the dream will be higher, right? So there are many factors to that. But then all that I'm saying is कि the dreams that you dream, not many of them do translate into the memory, into active memory, let's say, right? Because you're not able to necessarily retrieve what you saw in the dream. But even if you do, you probably are able to remember the dream enough to possibly just tell me or tell yourself what all objects did you see in the dream. You might have seen a snake, a balloon, a beautiful house, a bungalow, whatnot. But if I were to ask you the color and shape and size of it, this is where you'll start faltering, because again you will not necessarily remember it, right? So the whole dream is extremely alive when you're dreaming, but the moment you're out of it, the dream is probably a faint memory and probably not even that, isn't it? That's the fact, that's the experience we all have, right? But then there is an additional thing to think about. What do you think is the difference between the objects that we see while we are awake and the objects that we see in our dream? In our dreams as well, we see all the same things. We see the birds, the animals, the things, the plants, the scenery, the house, the people. We interact with people, we talk to people. All of it is there in the dreams as well, right? And it's as alive while you're dreaming. And that's why when you suddenly wake up exasperated that, hey, I just saw the worst dream, I had a nightmare, or probably it was the most beautiful dream that I've ever seen, right? You can remember it very vividly. It's as if you were there. But then there's definitely some difference between the objects that you see while you're awake and the objects that you see while in the dream. The obvious answer, of course, is that what you see while you're awake is real, and what you see while you dream is virtual, right? Yes, I mean that's a very superficial distinction between the objects, yes, and it's a true distinction, no doubt about it. But there's something larger and bigger at play here. So let's discuss that. क्या है वो difference between the objects that you see in the dream and the objects that you see while you're awake? The very first thing that you should note is that whatever objects that you dream in your dream, they are all from your memory. दे कैनॉट बी बियॉन्ड योर मेमोरी. आपके मेमोरी से ही निकले हुए ये ऑब्जेक्ट्स हैं. ऑल दैट यू हैव सीन सो फार इन योर लाइफ, okay, your brain would have captured, your mind would have captured lot of information without you knowing it. The way we drive on the street, and we look at probably left or right as part of driving, we might have seen a billboard, we might have seen somebody walking around and all, but it doesn't necessarily become a foreground thing for us, right? It doesn't become the highlight for us. But somebody suddenly says, hey, did you actually see something on that corner, on the traffic light corner? Did you see some beggar? And then you suddenly, yeah, I did see it, right? Your brain has captured that information, but it's just that it doesn't bring to your foreground, and hence you don't necessarily notice it, but it's all there, right? So all the objects that you see in your dream are all from your memory. Even if you see a snake, the snake actually would be either from the movie that you would have seen, from a museum that you saw it, from a textbook image that you would have seen, from whatever. It would be from your memory. But then the life that is there in those objects, right? Because the objects are alive. The snake is as alive as it is probably when you're awake. If you're speaking to your mom or father or brother, sister, wife, husband, whoever in your dream, they are actually as alive as probably they are in while you're awake, right? So the life that is there in that object, that is pretty much real while you're dreaming, but that life actually is nothing else but your own life. It's you who's kind of enliving those objects while you're dreaming. So while you're dreaming, all that you see, one is from your memory, and two, if what you see is alive, if it's an animal, if it's if it's one of your relatives, if somebody who if there are people, if they're talking to you, all that life that you see in your dreams, that's nothing but extension of your own life. It's you who's enliving them, isn't it? And that's something that you have to note, because all that's happening, the whole life that's instilled in them is basically you. It's you who's giving life to all those characters, and they are coming to life through you. And that's why the moment you're awake, it's all gone, right? It's virtual, it's all gone, right? And that activity, that life is not from memory. That's actually you genuinely giving them life. It's blood and flesh while you're dreaming, isn't it? It's just that when you're out of the dream, it's all gone, right? But then it's you who's giving life, genuine life, to those characters, to those things that you see. The imagery, the naam roop, the matter and form, as we call it, is actually coming in from your memory. Whereas in the real world, while you're awake, it's actually coming in from those very specific objects. Whereas while you're dreaming, the matter and form is coming in from your memory, but the life is coming in from you. And that's something just for you to note, right? So that is a very essential difference between the objects that you see in the while you're awake and objects that you see while you're dreaming, isn't it? Now, what is more important to also see is then what happens when you're fast asleep. Now there are no objects, Now there is no. Okay, by the way, there's one thing that I probably missed highlighting here as well, that hey, your identity is very much intact even while you're dreaming, isn't it? Because even when you're dreaming, if it's a nightmare, you are afraid of something that's happening to you. So in your dream, you're seeing the dream from a first person view, isn't it? You are very much there in character, but you might be somebody else, you might be a different character, you might be a child, you might be a grown up man, you might be an old guy, you might be a man, woman, you might be a dog, you might be whatever, right? So your character might be different, but you are still you, in the sense that you're seeing it from a self identity perspective, a first person view perspective, isn't it? The dream, and that's why that the dream happens as if you are in it and you're seeing it, and things are happening to you while you're in the dream. So your self identity is very much there, and I'll actually kind of tabulate it for you so that it's easy for you to remember as well. But just note this that I'm saying here, right? And lastly, what happens when you're fast asleep? The self identity is gone. It's no more about me, I'm sleeping. That very thought of I'm sleeping is gone. You don't even realize that you have slept, right? All the objects are gone. There is no reality or virtual world construct available anymore. There is nothing, right? It's just you fast asleep. So now let's tabulate what we see when you are awake, when you are dreaming, and when we are fast asleep. Jagruti, swapna, sushupti, right? So when you are awake, the body is very much there, deha is very much there, and then the distinction between our body and other objects is very much concrete and distinctively available for all of us to know and see, isn't it? The manas is that part of the brain which basically captures or interprets the sensory information, is very much active. Buddhi, the intellectual faculty which processes the information from the manas and then tells you what it is, what that particular object is very much active as well. Ahamkara is very much active. Ahamkara is the identity, self identity, is very much active. That's why whatever you see, you relate to your own self. The associativeness of what you see to you is very much active. And the Atman that gives you life is very much there, right? Because you're alive, isn't it? So all these five faculties are very much there. Deha, Manas, Buddhi, Ahamkara, Atman. All of that is very much active while you are awake. Now when you are dreaming, when you're sleeping and when you're dreaming, what happens? The deha is gone, right? That is why you're able to take up so many constructs, so many character constructs, right? You can become a dog in a dream, you can become an old guy, young guy, kid, infant, whatever. You can become whatever in your dream, right? You tend to become whatever you become in the dream, because the deha faculty is gone. When I say gone, it means from the consciousness dimension perspective. You are not conscious about your body anymore. That consciousness of physical body is gone. But the manas is very much there, the sensory input is very much there, buddhi is very much there, which is why you become afraid, which is why you become emotional, which is why you're engaged in that dream as much emotionally, intellectually. You get all the same triggers that possibly you get while you're awake. The faculty of memory is very much active, which is a construct within buddhi. So, and that is why you are able to remember the dream at times as well, right? Ahamkara is very much there. We just discussed this कि अहमकारा है. अभी भी मैं जब सपना देखता हूँ तो we see it from a first person view perspective, right? And Atman is very much there, but there is a thing to note here. The Atman is very much there because you surely are alive even if you are asleep. But then the way the Atman, your Atman and my Atman is all the same. It's the same Brahman giving us life in the real world while we are awake. It is your Atman which is creating life or giving life to all the objects that you see while you're dreaming, right? So that is a way to understand the concept of Atman as well, right? If while we are awake there is something called Atman which is giving life to all of us, and it is the same Atman that gives life to you, that gives life to me as well, and to the dogs as well, and to all of them as well. The same way my Atman, or my life, me individually, I am giving life to all the objects, snakes and ghosts and whatever I see in the dreams. I make them alive, right? So it's me giving them life. But while we are dreaming, all of them appear distinct. All of them are individuals, right? But it's me. It's just me being extended into those lives, right? Do you understand that? And the last piece is Sushupti, when you are asleep, where now Ahamkara is gone. because there is no sense of I am sleeping anymore. I am dreaming is very much there when I'm dreaming, right? But when I'm asleep, fast asleep, I am asleep, that awareness is gone, right? But the senses are very much active. Buddhi is very much active, and Atman is very active. Buddhi I have highlighted in yellow specifically because here, while we are fast asleep, the whole buddhi or intellect is now being taken care of by the central nervous system, and it's a modern science understanding as well, isn't it? Now, a slight lateral note on Omkara and how it associates with the Jagrut, Swapna, Sushupti Avastha as well. It's just a lateral note, nothing coming in directly from Bhagavad Gita, but just so that there's an added understanding of what this Omkara means. And because we have discussed Jagrut, Swapna, Sushupti Avastha, it's important for you to relate to that Akar, so Omkar is A-U-M. The Akar is basically symbolizing the Jagrut Avastha, the physical world, the real world, where the consciousness, where the universal consciousness, the faculty that helps us be aware, that is actually helping us be aware of all that's around us in terms of the physical constructs, the sensory constructs, the intellectual constructs, the self-identity constructs, and the eternal Atman as well, right? Because that's essentially giving us life. So the Akar, that's why, is actually symbolizing the physical construct or the Jagrut Avastha, and it's also the first letter of Omkar, and it actually should therefore, when you utter it, come from your stomach, from your belly, right? So when you utter the Akar in the Omkar, that sound should come from your belly. It should be a guttural sound, right? It should come from your belly, right? The Ukar actually is something which symbolizes the Swapnavastha, where the consciousness, the universal consciousness, is now basically living in the dimension of your sensory input, of your intellectual inputs, of your self-identity construct, and of course the Atman, but the physical construct is gone, right? And the Ukar is therefore to be uttered from your throat. The sound should come from your throat when you utter Ukar, right? And the Makar, the Ma of Om, is actually something that symbolizes the deep sleep state or the Sushupti state, Sushupti Avastha, where now the consciousness is in the realm of sensory, intellectual, and the Atman dimension, right? The physical dimension is gone, the self-identity dimension is gone, and it's now living in the plane of your sensory and intellectual dimensions alone, isn't it? So now, and therefore the Makar should now then be uttered in a nasal tone, right? So guttural through throat, and then the nasal. That is how the A, U, Ma should be uttered, and together when they come, the Omkar actually then is denoting or symbolizing the Turiya state, the fourth avastha, the fourth state of mind, which is when you're purely in a state of awareness. There is not even a quality of sensory information, intellectual information, and the Atman dimension. There is no qualitative aspect here at all. It is just plain awareness. That's it. And that's the state to which our mind needs to be elevated through meditation. And once you reach that stage, you would say that I am spiritually realized, that I am a realized soul, that I have achieved the spiritual maturity, right? So that's essentially the stages of growth for a spiritual upliftment as per Vedic scriptures. That is a quick note on Omkara as well, but essentially that's a quick overview of what consciousness is, and again through the lens of experience. All that I've said is within the realm of our own experience. It is not theory, it is not dissection, it is not deduction, isn't it? Now let's get into the 14th chapter. In 14th chapter, Sri Krishna is basically telling Arjuna the very same things that we have so far discussed in terms of consciousness, but he's extending it further and saying that whatever forms are produced in any womb of creation, that is the universe, the Prakriti is their great womb, and I am the sowing father. When Krishna is saying I, he's talking about it from a perspective of he symbolizing the supreme consciousness or the plain consciousness, untainted awareness, thing that just is and just is for the sake of it, right? So when Krishna is saying that I am the sowing father, he's meaning that I as consciousness is just enliving the objects that are there in the prakriti or in the nature, right? All that this one quotation is symbolizing is the very fact that we can experience while we are dreaming. It is I who's giving life to all the objects that I see in the dream, and the objects in itself, the naam roop or the matter and form of the objects, is coming in from memory, right? So while I'm dreaming, I am the one who's giving them life to the objects, and the objects are coming in from memory. Now if I extend the same logic to the real world while I'm awake, I, the supreme consciousness, the divine form, is actually giving life to all of us, and the name and form is coming in from nature, or the matter, right? So prakriti and purush, that's a combination, which gives us the world that we live in, right? Prakriti is all the name and form, the matter and form that you see, naam roop that we see, and purush is the consciousness that embodies in the prakriti to give it a living form, isn't it? And this prakriti purush is actually, in when you're dreaming, your purush is actually enliving, you yourself are enliving the objects, and the prakriti is all coming in from memory, right? So that's one quotation, which is where I would link all that we discussed as part of consciousness, and how Krishna is communicating that to the Arjuna. And then further, Krishna is saying sattva, raja, tama are the gunas that arise from prakriti, and they bind the immutable self in the body, right? So there must be glue, right? There must be some glue that combines the prakriti and the purusha together. There must be some fevicol, which kind of joins the prakriti and purusha together. So that fevicol here is the gunas, the three gunas that we have studied so much in the earlier sessions as well. So how do they bind? How do they bind an individual in this form, right? Our eternal consciousness, the supreme consciousness that's giving us life, that is bound to our body, through this glue of gunas. So how? Let's see that. So when we say sattva guna has this glue of happiness and knowledge that binds us, that binds the consciousness to the body. What does that mean? It means that if somebody has a higher sattva guna or more of sattva guna than the other gunas, then essentially he is a seeker of happiness and is a seeker of knowledge. And the very hunger and seeking of happiness and knowledge binds him or her to this prakriti, to this play of the world around us. So you would see that there will be people who are attached to their life, who live their life, who think of this world in real blood and flesh, purely out of their seeking of happiness and knowledge, and that's how they're bound to what they do. Whereas if you see, there are those kind of people who have more of rajoguna as compared to sattva and tama, they will be bound to their life because of their hunger for ambition, achievement, and then alignment to the principle of sacrifice, in the sense that they know, if I have to achieve something, I have to give something, and they'll be constantly in the cycle of giving something to get something, isn't it? There will always be in a cycle of cause and effect. Choices and circumstances and choices again, right? So they are eternally caught up in this particular cycle, and they'll have this hunger for ambition for something and achievement of something, and that will bound them to their life, that will bound them to the prakriti, right? And then the tamoguna, people who have more of tamoguna as compared to the other things, they are bound to this by a sense of avoidance of the principle of sacrifice, and they are here for pleasure. See, pleasure and happiness are two different things. Pleasure is when you pleasure is something that you want as part of your experience or participatory experience, whereas happiness is a state. Pleasure is something that you get while doing something, while pleasure is something, for example, you like to eat something, that's pleasure. But after doing something, what you feel is, you feel happy, right? So happy is a state where pleasure is something that you get out of doing something, right? So tamoguna people are more who are attached to the life out of seeking pleasure. They are in it to to win pleasures, and then they want to avoid, for to achieve the pleasure they don't necessarily want to give up something. They want to break this cycle of having to give something to get something, and they're eternally in the cycle of having to avoid it to get something, right? And these are contradictory things. They want pleasure, but they don't want to necessarily give something to achieve that. And that binds them to this world, right? So these are the key principles of these gunas that kind of bind the individuals influenced by these gunas to the prakriti, to the nature, to the reality of life, right? What are the larger themes? The larger theme is curiosity in case of sattva, thirst in case of rajoguna, and ignorance in case of tamoguna, right? So these are qualitative aspects that bind you to this reality of the world, right? And that's when Arjuna is asking Krishna in the 14th adhyaya, that Arjuna says, what are the marks of a man who has crossed beyond the three gunas? Because if what Krishna says is right, if what Krishna is saying is that, hey, while the supreme consciousness is your actual nature, because that's what something that's giving you life, and you are actually the supreme consciousness, bound by the physical body, bound by the sensory organs, bound by the gunas that you have, which we can all combine into a term called prakriti, and you as a purusha is nothing but the eternal consciousness, and it's just that the prakriti and purusha are bound together or held together by the glue of the gunas, that you don't realize your true self. That's essentially what Krishna is saying, right? So Arjuna is obviously asking him, then there might be those people who have been able to eliminate that fevicol, eliminate that glue, right? And that's when they would have now been able to realize the purusha, right? They would have realized the eternal consciousness or experienced the supreme consciousness. So what is their behavior like? The people who have been able to realize their true self, what is their behavior like, and how does one cross beyond the three gunas? How do you cross the chasm, right? So now in the next chapter, 15-16 chapters, we are going to discuss this at length, right? But in one line, Krishna sums up that the people who have been able to cross these three gunas, go beyond these three gunas, then they rest unshaken. They are unconcerned and undisturbed by the gunas. What does it mean? It means that they will not have either craving for happiness, nor necessarily they'll have any craving for knowledge. They'll not have craving for pleasure. They'll not have any ambition or necessarily a sense of achievement. They'll constantly do what they're doing for the sake of duty, for the sake of maximizing their own potential, because they would have been truly aware of their own swadharma, of the gunas that they carry. They would realize that, hey, whatever I'm doing and whatever instincts and triggers and motivations that I'm having is coming in from my gunas, and I'm here to give it justice, to do my best. But that's all, right? It doesn't mean that if it translates into something, that's something I'm aspiring for, that's something I'm craving for. It's an outcome, it's a result of what I'm doing, it's a consequence, but I'm not chasing that, right? And that's the quality of somebody who's gone beyond these gunas. So that's it for the 14th chapter. But at this stage, I wanted to quickly give you a simple framework, because now अभी तक हमने 14 अध्याय पूरे किए हैं. We have completed 14 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, and I'm keen that I get to consolidate all our learnings, all the insights that we have had so far, and start giving you a quick framework that I am personally using very well for my own personal decisions, choices, and all that. And I am being helped immensely by this framework. So I'm just sharing this with you, and it's a framework that you can use for any dilemma that you have in your life. कोई भी dilemma आपके लाइफ में आएगा, आप ये framework बहुत आसानी से यूज़ कर पाओगे. तो ये क्या है? First of all, I am very consciously using a term dilemma and not problems and challenges, right? So all of you who would have gone through the earlier sessions with me, please go and look back into the first session where we discussed the difference between problems, challenges, and dilemma, and why Gita is necessary for dilemmas and not for problems and challenges, right? So all that you are seeing here is a dilemma resolution framework, right? अब आपके लाइफ के जो भी dilemmas होंगे, जो भी specific dilemmas होंगे, ये करूँ कि वो करूँ, ये choice लूँ कि वो choice लूँ, this person or that person or what not, this job or that job, or whatever dilemmas that you may have had in your life, right? Or you will have in your life, इनके 3 ही dimension होंगे. Only 3 dimensions, nothing beyond these 3 dimensions. One, those dilemmas could be triggered by the situation or the circumstance that you're in. Those dilemmas and triggers, dilemmas could be triggered by the people around you. Those could be your enemies, friends, relatives, husband, wife, children, whatever, right? Those would be people in your life, triggered by the people in your life. And the third is, those dilemmas would be triggered by you. There can't be anything else, right? And when I say people, I mean, I'm not restricting it to human beings. It could be your pets as well, for example, right? Anything, but those would be, that would be the situation that you're in, the circumstance that you're in, the people or the external individuals that are there in your life, and it would be you yourself. That's it. There can't be a fourth dimension to your dilemma. There cannot be. It's impossible. It's impossible that you will be able to find any fourth dimension to this dilemma. And I challenge you on that. I give an open challenge that you prove to me that there is a fourth dimension to this dilemma as well, and I'll give it whatever you want. There cannot be any. It's impossible to find any fourth dimension to this, right? Now, what are the aspects of these three dimensions? Let's think about it from the perspective of control. कि आपका कितना कंट्रोल है इन डायमेंशंस को लेके, राइट? सिचुएशन, एक सिचुएशन या सर्कमस्टांस जिसमें आप हैं, विच इज़ रिजल्टिंग इन सम डिलेमा फॉर यू, इसके ऊपर आपका कितना कंट्रोल है? 0%. 0%. यू कांट डू एनीथिंग अबाउट द सिचुएशन. आप जिस सिचुएशन में हो, लेट्स से कोरोना, अगर हम सबको अभी, वी आर इन अ सिचुएशन वेयर द वर्ल्ड हैज़ बीन इम्पैक्टेड बाय कोरोना. व्हाट कैन यू डू अबाउट इट? in the sense that, can you change this situation on your own? Can you suddenly wipe it all clean and say कि corona है ही नहीं? You can't do that. The situation is what it is. Now you might say, hey Ashutosh, the situation could be because of what I did in the past, right? For example, if I didn't study for the whole year and now I'm in a situation that tomorrow is my exam and I don't know anything about it, right? Clearly, definitely that's a situation you have brought it about on yourself. आप ही के वजह से आई है, आपके choices के वजह से आई है, आपके decisions के वजह से आई है, आप ही के कामों की वजह से आई है. But then that is there now. That situation is there now. It could be because of you or without, not because of you. But it is what it is. Can you change it? Can you go back into the past and change it? You cannot. This is what it is. You are where you are, right? So now, given that you are in this situation, you have no control over that situation. The situation will be what it is, right? And that's why I'm saying it's 0% control. So far so good. But the people who have triggered this dilemma, you have a 50-50 control on that. Why am I saying 50-50? Because they can never be 100% control, because then otherwise they'll be robots, right? They'll be robots, not people. If they're robots whose coding is in your hands, whose controls are in your hands, whose remote control is in your hands, they'll do exactly what you want them to do, right? And they can't be 0% because they're people, right? We are all individuals, all of us. We can be motivated, we can be persuaded, we can be pleaded, we can be requested, we can be influenced, impressed on, whatnot, right? We are individuals, we are human beings. There are so many triggers and motivations for us that we can be persuaded, we can be pleaded, we can be requested to do something, even if we don't want to do that, right? So there's always an arena or area of influence, of persuasion, of request that is at play, right? But it can't be 100% because you're talking about individuals and not robots, and there can't be 0% because there's always something that could be done, but it's somewhere in between, right? That's why I'm saying 50-50. But when it comes to your own self, you have 100% control over your own self, isn't it? Now don't tell me that, hey, I cannot increase my height by 5 inches. Of course you cannot, right? So when I say you have 100% control about yourself, all that I mean is from a perspective of what you can do, or can you do what you want to do? You can do what you want to do. It's up to you, right? Of course you have to be realistic in terms of what is possible, humanly possible and not humanly possible, debatable again, but within the normal realms of realistic possibilities, you have 100% control over your own self, isn't it? This is a dimension of control. Now let's look at it from a perspective of truth dimension. That, okay, given the fact that there are only 3 aspects to a dilemma: situation, people and self, and that you have varying controls over each of these, given this, what is it that you can do about these, right? In case of situation, given a particular situation or a circumstance that you have, number one, what you can do about it, you can be 100% be aware of that, राइट. एंड व्हेन आई से अवेयर यू मीन आई मीन एवरीथिंग अबाउट द सिचुएशन. ये सिचुएशन कहाँ से आई, क्यों आई, आपकी कौन सी चीज़ों की वजह से आई है, इसका इम्पैक्ट आपके लिए क्या क्या होने वाला है, कौन से तरीके से होने वाला है, कब कब होने वाला है, कब तक होने वाला है, who others are going to be impacted, all of that, right? Being completely aware of the situation is what you can do, right? And when I say awareness, I mean again awareness from a third person perspective. See, you would always note that किसी भी सिचुएशन का, सर्कमस्टांसिस का अगर न्यूट्रल पर्सपेक्टिव मन में रखना है, यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड द सिचुएशन in the perfect way possible. You have to be neutral about it. The moment you bring in subjectivity, that very moment you will start losing, you start having biases. You will not be able to necessarily understand or comprehend the situation holistically. The moment you bring in objectivity into it, the chances of you becoming fully aware of the situation are very high, right? So remove subjectivity, bring in objectivity, and be fully aware of the situation is all that you can do at any given point of time. That's the truth, right? That's the truth, and which cannot be debated, right? And the second thing is you can accept the situation, because as I said, 0% control, you can't do anything about it. It is what it is. That's it. You can't do anything about it, right? And that's acceptance, which is because the moment you accept, when you start facing facts, when you will start saying that this is the situation that I am in and I have to get out of it, that very moment things will start happening. But the moment you say, hey, you start ignoring, or you start living a lie, you start saying कि ऐसा हुआ ही नहीं है, ऐसा हुआ ही नहीं है, ऐसा हुआ ही नहीं है, your life will not move on, right? So awareness and acceptance are the only two things that you can do at any given point of time. And when it comes to people, the same two things apply. You can become fully aware of the individuals. Where are they coming from? Why are they acting the way they are acting? What is it that they need? Why is it that they are behaving this particular way? What are the triggers? What are their motivations? What would have been their background? What would have been their influences and what not, right? Being fully aware of that particular individual or individuals who are triggering this dilemma in you, and then accepting for the fact that they are what they are, right? And accepting that there's only as much as you can do given what they are. There's that you can't be in 100% control. They will not behave exactly how you want them to be behaving, right? Accepting that fact is very important. Now you might say, Ashutosh, hey, acceptance, if I accept all of it, how can there be any change? Right? And it's a very valid question, very, very, very valid question. See, there would have been somebody who would not been happy walking, and that's when somebody invented the wheel. There would have been somebody who would not have been happy, mechanically driving the wheel, and that's when somebody invented engine, somebody invented fuel. The whole process of discovery, innovation, progress, growth has been done because somebody was not ready to accept the status quo, right? So when I say acceptance, I don't mean accepting the status quo. When I say acceptance, I mean the acceptance post validation of alignment to purpose and priority. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that, hey, there are so many things that are around you which probably are not to your liking, right? And therefore, you may not necessarily want to accept it, right? But then you having to work on that particular thing to change it. Is it in your purpose? Is it aligned to the purpose that you have for yourself? And is it your priority? See, just think of it. You might be in an organization and you don't like the food that you get in the canteen. You probably are not happy with it, and you don't want to accept it. How is it that a company so good gives such pathetic food in the canteen, right? And that might be a challenge, right? And that's something that you would want to work on. Sure, fine. I mean, you don't want to accept it, don't accept it. But hey, is this your purpose? I mean, is this something you want to fret about and work on and spend 1 hour, half an hour, 3 hours, whatever XYZ hours that will take to fix this? Is this something that you want to take up as your purpose for yourself in that organization? Yes or no? If you are an HR, if you are an admin, fine. But if you are probably a sales guy, probably a corporate strategist or whatever, is this something that is aligned to your purpose? Yes and no. And then two, is this something that is aligned to your priority? Is this something that if you're free, you have nothing much to do and you can just spend 5 hours getting this done, fine. If you don't have 5 minutes as well to do what you're supposed to do, is this then your priority, right? So I know it's a simplistic example, but all I mean to convey is that, hey, acceptance has to be validated in terms of alignment to the purpose that you have and the priorities that you have. And even if you feel that a certain thing is not acceptable enough, as long as it's not aligned to your purpose and priority, why do you care? Why should you even care? Why should you even bother? Isn't it? So it's only when it is aligned to your purpose, and it is aligned to your priority, then you should actually care enough to say, hey, why should I accept it? But even then, whatever it is, situation or people, even then, you being fully aware of what it is, and two, being fully accepting the limitations that it poses is key, right? Even in the case of canteen, the simplest of example I took, even in that case, accepting that, hey, it's not that you will write a letter and it will be done. For that to happen, there is a hierarchy which you'll have to accept, there is a process that you'll have to accept, there is somebody else's responsibility which you'll have to accept. It's not your responsibility to fix it, somebody else's responsibility to fix it. So you letting that person drive that responsibility, and of course possibly escalate, complain, or do whatever, but follow a particular process and workflow for it. You have to accept the norms and standards and rules and workflows and processes that are in place in that organization is something you have to accept, right? You can't just say, I don't like it, tomorrow it should not be there. Who are you? Unless you're a CEO who can get that done that way, you can't do it. So there is a level of acceptance that comes in anyways, isn't it? Right? But then for you to be not accepting it fully, you have to ensure that whether it is validated by alignment to purpose and priority, right? Then there is a third element which is a bit distinct from situation when it comes to people, is acknowledgement. Because a lot of times we are aware of what the other individuals are. We are possibly accepting him or her the way they are as well, because that things can change, and possibly you're just guiding and influencing in whichever way you can. But then unless you acknowledge quite openly and let the other person know as well, that relationship is never going to move forward positively, never ever. Because it's important that not only you acknowledge to yourself, which is nothing but acceptance, but also acknowledge it so that the other person knows what you're doing, because that is when the true alignment will come in. Unless that happens, it's not going to come in, right? So acknowledgement is absolutely critical when it comes to the people as well, right? And the last part, when it comes to your own self, of course there's a sense of acceptance in the same way, right? That because a lot of times there is denial, we live in denial कि नहीं मैं तो handsome हूँ, right? You may not be the most handsome individual in the room, नहीं मैं तो intelligent हूँ, you may not be the most intelligent person in the room, right? So having an acceptance of where you truly are, of course it will come from awareness and swadharma analysis, but once you have done that, being very clear about where you stand is the first step to growth, right? And the second thing is alignment to your swadharma, alignment to your purpose, alignment to your priorities, and so on, which is very key, right? So that's something that one needs to work on when it comes to analysis of the dilemma and what to do about it. And then now what to do about it? Tools. One, situation. If you are in a situation which is leading to a particular dilemma, having this perspective that, hey, we live in a world which is so vast, the expanse, the diversity, the complexity of it is so huge that you individually are not one unique individual around which the entire universe would revolve, right? If something's happening to you, it would have happened to 100 others or 1,000 others or millions of others at the same time as well, right? So you're not something special, unique in that way. And two, at best, given the situation, given that you have no control in it, at best you can just do your work and expect things to happen. As long as you're doing your best, you should be okay, right? Because you can't do magic in a sense, right? It is what it is. So at best you can just continue putting your efforts in the right direction and expect things to move and change, right? But you can't necessarily expect magic to happen, that now that you're putting in efforts, tomorrow it should all be okay, right? So a perspective and work orientation or karma yoga are the two key things when it comes to impacting the situation, right? When it comes to impacting the people, number one thing is knowing that whoever they are, ultimately at the core we are all the same beings. It's the same supreme consciousness which is giving them life, which is giving life to you as well, right? So at the core we are all the same, right? But there must be, of course, distinct gunas that trigger them in a different way than what than how we are triggered. There must be different conditioning. They would have been raised differently. They would have different types of influences, triggers, motivations, and whatnot. And that's why they're different than who you are, right? And which is fine, which is okay, because you are different than them as well, right? So we are all the same at the core, but we may not be same exactly. We are not clones of each other, right? So having that understanding of being at the same at the level of Atman, and being different and differently triggered in terms of triggers and motivations and all that because of the influence of the gunas, this understanding has to be there, right? And then there has to be an understanding of your own swadharma, and therefore a sense of alignment to the individuals, whether those individuals align to your swadharma or not. Because there's a sense of practical, pragmatic acceptance that needs to come in, that hey, because of the way I am, there are only these type of people who I could align to, and then certain type of people I just cannot, right? And then having a level of acceptance on that is critical. And then the third, if you still want to make things happen, possibly influence, change, care enough for someone to pick up on your advice and suggestions and improvements and all that, then all that you can do is focus on work orientation. Do your best, and the outcome is never in your hands, right? Keep doing the best, right? And the last is self, of course, swadharma analysis, of course, alignment to purpose and prioritization, and nothing else but work orientation. What's common to all is work orientation, karma yoga, right? And that's the key theme of Bhagavad Gita anyways. So this is a quick framework for all of you to focus on when it comes to resolving your real life dilemmas. I just gave you a quick jump in on that, but we'll elaborate this further as we go along into the next few chapters. But this is the 14th chapter for you all. There are 4 more chapters to go before we end this series of sessions. And till then, thank you so much, and take care, be safe. And any questions and queries, feel free to write to me on email or message me on WhatsApp. My number and other details are right there on the screen for you. Thank you. Take care.